Okay, so that's this one. And the rest, I'm going to go in a bit more detail. So this is the heirloom paper. And the way this paper happened, this is Meltem Ture. She teaches at Schema in France now, again a former PhD student. I've had the good fortune of working with good people in multiple senses of the word. I owe a lot to my PhD students. They are good scholars and good people, both. So I've been very, very fortunate. So she came to the program, our PhD program. We held reading groups. And what I mean, I don't know if you do this. Every 2 weeks, not every week, every 2 weeks, one of the PhD students picked up a paper that they thought was interesting. A paper, you know, recent, but not necessarily that recent. And all of us, the whole group, read that paper. We met for 1 hour, and we discussed the paper in terms of not just what the paper was saying, but our evaluation of the paper, what we might do with the paper. Do we get any ideas from that paper? We found this practice extremely useful. Extremely useful. So we read a paper on disposing in the USA. I mean, the names may sound non-American, but the study was conducted in the USA, and these people lived in the USA at the time. So how people dispose, the 3 paths to disposing products, movement of meaningful possessions to strangers. Not heirlooms, disposing. Meltem, her first name is Meltem, my co-author. She said, well, you know, this topic sounds very interesting. And, you know, disposing is something we all do, right? So even if you've not done research, you always have your own experience about disposing. She found this interesting because she thought the paths that they were talking about did not explain or describe the kinds of disposition we do in Turkey. So she said, you know, I can say something to the disposition literature with this. So this is her PhD. And theoretically, it's an important topic because even though we say we study consumption, you know, at the end of consumption, there's another cycle of consumption. How do you get rid of the stuff that you have consumed? Are you going to give it away, reuse, dispose? So she's doing her field work on disposing. And then she noticed that there are some items, meaningful possessions, that people were not passing away. And they were not exactly keeping them as is either. She said, you know, these are not being disposed. What do I do with the stuff that I find in my data? I can't use this data for disposing. I said, okay, let's do a separate paper of the things that people are not disposing. So then she collected some more data. She went back to the same people. And this time focused on those items that they did not dispose. So she did a second interview on undisposed items. And then, you know, she went to places where, you know, shops that you can sell your stuff to recycle, to reuse, to contextualize the phenomena. She was already doing that for the disposing anyway. So she did a side field study, not a huge one, a much smaller one, but a side study. So we have this habit of my students write a paper with me first, them as the first author, me as the second author, then they write their own paper. So we started working on the heirloom paper, but you will see the first revision we got was a reject and resubmit, and it entailed a lot of work. So she said, there's no way I will be able to submit the JCR before I graduate, and at my university they have to have a publication before they can get their PhD. So she did a solo paper on values in marketing theory. And then after she finished her PhD, we started rewriting, revising this paper. So some items that look nothing like what the literature finds. And these items, what's interesting about them is these used to be big pillows, and pillows that people put on sofas like this, which have a long history. The Ottomans and Turks used to sit on pillows and sofas, not on chairs. So these are the foreign ambassadors sitting on chairs. It's not that Ottomans did not have chairs. They did, but they preferred to sit on the sofas. So these kinds of big pillows had a prominent place. Now we don't have these pillows. Nobody sits on pillows. So people cut it off and make it into a little carpet. People used to wear things like this for their wedding. So now we use this as a wall decoration, or people make a mirror on the other side, on the reverse side of this. And of course, the watch. So, starting with the context, how do we begin to abstract from the context? The past in Turkey is imagined to be positive because Ottomans were big, huge, some desirable imaginary, and also this rural, authentic, romantic notion, but mostly negative because Turkey moved from Ottomans to the Republic very quickly with a huge break. We switched language, alphabet, everything. And the ideals were modernity, progress, urbanization. New was good, old was bad, urban was good, rural was bad. And urbanites attempt to distance themselves from the rural inhabitants. So we use a lot of space in the paper to talk about these imaginaries, because we use these imaginaries in coming up with our theorization. So we're going to use the macro history of the dowry. Dowry is what women get when they get married in Turkey, and the cultural narratives, imaginaries surrounding its preparation and consumption, as much as the family-specific stories, which the literature, Linda Price's work is the major work, and Linda Price and her colleagues work on heirlooms, have published on heirlooms, and they focus on family stories. So we say, in addition to this, the macro stories also make an importance. And this is an expectation, a hypothesis, if you will. So here we're trying to link the context to theorization and the ending of the paper. To give you an idea of this paper, the first version was sent in 2011. The decision was to reject and resubmit, and McGill was the editor. Now there's no reject and resubmit category, but at that time there was. So they said, you know, start all over basically. Start all over. So we took 2 years to redo the paper, and everything changed. Material relations with the family and the self, spatial and temporal consumption. The spatial went away completely, the family went away completely. So one problem was, we were talking about, the literature was talking about the family in relationship to heirlooms. So we were talking about the family because the literature was talking about the family. But we collected data. Our unit of analysis was the individual, not the family. So, you know, of course the reviewers noticed. They said, you can't do this. You have two choices. Either go collect family data, make the family your unit of analysis, or, you know, omit family and do something else with this paper. So we decided not to collect any more data, instead focus on transformation of heirlooms. How, you know, in the literature, heirlooms are kept as they are. They're never ever transformed. In our case, we find them being transformed. Great, very interesting, different finding, but you can't stop there. You have to explain why this difference. And what does this difference imply for objects in general? Not just heirlooms, but objects in general. So the big step was from here to here. This took a huge effort. And then from 2 to 3 also took a huge effort, because even though here they bought our story. They said, we like the story, we think there's a contribution in there somewhere, but we don't know where it is. We guess there's something, but we don't quite know where it is. So after the third version, as you can see, it sort of went rather quickly. But 5 versions. Yes?
The field work was done in the beginning of 2011.
Even before that. The first version was submitted in 2011.
So
Before that.
Yes, how can we plan or be prepared for changes in the context we are investigating? Because we know if we started our field today, these results or this data should be relevant for the next 4 years, or at least.
You cannot, because there's no way to foresee change, but you just go along with the context. If things change, you have to explain the change. It becomes a longitudinal study.
Maybe you should go to the field again.
Yes, maybe you should go to the field again. But I mean, if you notice a change, you're already in the field is what I'm assuming. Otherwise, yeah, you go to the field again. If things change very, very, very quickly. And if you haven't yet published. Yes. Well, sometimes that happens actually. I mean, I was reviewing a paper last week. They started out the first field work 10 years ago. And then they didn't get to write the paper in time. So by the time they wrote the paper, that was what the reviewers said, the phenomena was changing. So after they got the revise and resubmit, they went back to the field again. After having submitted, because the reviewers basically asked for it. So yeah, you can go back to the field. Sure. Okay, so I don't want to go into the detail of what the paper is doing, but basically in this paper, again, we focus on materiality, but this time it's not the emotionality we put together with materiality, we put temporality together with materiality. So this imaginary that I kept talking about is important because the context suggested to us that we have to deal with temporality, people's imaginations of the past, their imaginations of today, and their imaginations of tomorrow. This becomes very important for us. And that comes from the context. And when you look at the temporality material in our literature, there's not much. There's not much at all. There's Nicholas's work a little bit, but not much. So this was an opportunity for us to delineate temporality and wed it with materiality. So this is the more descriptive part, the processes of rejuvenation, 3 types of heirloom essence. We thought that was descriptive, but the reviewers really liked this. Because, with hindsight, I can see it, because this sort of says, not everything becomes an heirloom. This becomes a general law, if you will, of how something can become an heirloom, which again did not exist in the literature. So this is our term. Zeitgeist value is a term that we made up. So rejuvenation integrates the heirloom into the heir's life trajectory, and note the term life trajectory. We don't say identity projects. This is a different conceptualization. By imbuing it with a zeitgeist value today, the importance of presence and imagination related to the present, and the heir's presence not the families, but the heir's presence, the young person's presence, helping the heir to better navigate her imaginaries of the past, present, and the future. So, what's happening? Individuals are negotiating past, present, future, continuity and change in the interaction of the material, and the market plays a role without making heirloom alienable. So we also speak back to inalienability literature. So this was the first version out because we were not dealing with the family. So I'm going to show you the reviewer's comments. Okay, thank you for submitting standard. My decision is to reject this manuscript. Boom. Okay? But to invite a new submission, that narrows the focus of research in one of the two ways proposed by the associate editor. The rationale for this decision is to reject the manuscript is provided in the associate editor's report. As you can see, the reviewers have concerns to the fundamentals of the research, including construct definitions. We did a horrible job defining our constructs, not well enough, not specifically enough. Theoretical development, not a good job. Sampling, not a good job, because we sampled individuals, not families. Findings, not good. Nothing is good. You see, nothing is good. We can't define anything, no theorization, bad sampling, bad findings. Despite presenting these shortcomings, the paper also engenders quite a bit of hope. Okay? So they saw something in there that they couldn't put their hands on, but they saw something. A strong contribution could be developed from this base, albeit a substantial amount of work. So they're saying, you know, you have something there, but you got to work a lot. Central to this optimistic assessment is the recognition that, yes, it's, you know, it's very clear, you know, you got to know where you're standing. The issues identified do not constitute a list of independent shortcomings, they're related. There's a single problem. The paper heads in too many different directions. You're going in too many different places. So this is actually a very constructive letter. Okay, you may think it's a bad letter. I think it's a great letter because it's telling me that I should not be lost in the list of criticisms. It basically is about one problem. The story doesn't hang together. It's going all kinds of directions. If I can resolve that, I will have something in there. So my ideas are not logically connected, analytically connected, completely incomplete. So the issue between family, personal identity, they have a point. And this is the end of the editor's letter. Now, how do you get the other papers, Maribel? How did you get this? Where? Okay, this one. Thank you. Okay. Yeah.
I was curious why they rejected at the end. Because if the three reviewers they reject, so the associate editor.
I don't know.
Because it seems that they see good things and that could
I don't know.
could be
I mean, they see good things, but they also probably think it's a long way to go. I don't know. You should ask it to the editor. Or ask it to Søren. Søren was the associate editor on this paper. I don't know. I never asked him. I mean, because I probably would have done the same thing if I were in his shoes. It's too risky. It's way too risky. What if I can't? What if we can't deliver and we go 6 rounds and still not deliver? What's going to happen then? Rejection in the 6th round? It's much better to tell us up front that this is a huge challenge. So, first of all, it never really convinces anyone of what it is actually about. Okay? The title suggests themes of spatiality and temporality. Literature review is focusing on personal family identity. Discussion section returns to spatiality, quite disconnected from the findings. And the findings are about something else. So all over the place. I'm not going to read the rest of it, but, details, this is sort of the basic point, then he details the points. So we go back to the bench. We start working again and again and again. And we look at our own work very critically. So yesterday I was talking about you don't need to put everything you find in the field in the paper. So we put things in that was happening, but none of this was new. It was already shown. So we kicked all of that out. It was in the data, okay, but we knew this already. The audience knew this already. All this went away. Gone. And we reworked everything else. So this is the newer version, which looks at basically what I was talking about. Well, this is not working. So heirlooms are not only identity anchors. This is what the literature was claiming. They're also vessels of change. So we start this paper by problematizing the literature. It's a different kind of a strategy than the others. And we show how imagined temporalities mediate this process of heirlooms being vessels of change. And we find some other things too. So well, we're using Heidegger's notion of becoming, Schatzky, so practice theory we're using, and we're focusing on, actually this is pretty important, I think. Let me show this. So the research question becomes, how does heirloom consumption accommodate becoming? So identity is the notion that you have an identity, but we bring something else to the plate. The process of becoming. Human beings are always becoming. So if heirlooms anchor us to the past, how do we become and still consume heirlooms? So here we need the heterogeneous time notion to explain, to answer this question, and how do they deal with all of this. So the literature review changes. We're not looking at the family stuff anymore. And this is the second version. Here we sort of looked at heirlooms as active, passive ones, and rich memories, weak memories. But this, is a 2x2 matrix, and 1 bit is empty. So, of course, they came back saying, if you're going to put a 2x2 matrix, you cannot have a box empty. And interestingly, the AE, associate editor, provide examples for the empty part. And he said, you need to clarify this. So we're talking about conditions for heirloom rejuvenation. So they're not always rejuvenated, but sometimes under these particular conditions. And this now we can generalize to all heirlooms in the US, in Brazil, wherever, because we're looking at the conditions in an abstract manner. Moving from the Turkish context, moving from these crazy, stupidly weird Turkish objects. And we have contributions in terms of social change, craft work in consumption, and the dual role of the market in terms of alienability. Let's look at what the, I forgot again where these things were. Here, okay. The AE this time. General stuff. The reviews span from fairly negative, mildly positive, to a very positive one. I guess the key word in explaining this difference is the one evoked by reviewers B and C, boundaries. Manuscript in its current state does not come across sufficiently coherent and integrating in connecting the various sections and arguments. So it's no longer, you don't have any theorization, you don't have any conceptualization. It's about coherence and interlinkages.